Hello again. I do apologize, like the last video. Our internet is not really working well at the school right now. So I can't log into our ULS system that I pull these articles and things from right now. So I have access to the printed materials. So I figured this would be better than not sending home any videos. So I do apologize, and I hope that you find this just as helpful as usual. So I'm going to be reading to you another part of Melanie Makes a Meal, and this part is about using the stove. So another appliance that you could use at your home to cook food. This is also another important thing to learn about because using the stove can be unsafe if you don't know how to use it correctly. We never want to start a fire or burn ourselves. So it takes practice, and you have to know the do's and don'ts for using the stove. So Melanie must learn how to use the stove. She will learn how to safely cook food on the stove. So that's smart for her to do, to learn how to use it before she just starts using it on her own, because she wants to be safe. Let's turn to page 2. So Melanie will need to start the stove. She will first turn the dials on the stove. Each dial will heat a different part of the stove. So depending on what your stove looks like, most of them still have dials that you need to turn for each burner. And most stoves have 4 burners. Although there are some big stoves that have 6, most of them have 4 burners. So if you look at this picture here in hers, it kind of shows you which burner she's going to start, which one she's going to make hot based on the picture. So it's one of the front ones, and it happens to be the one that is on the right side. So in order to heat up the stove, you have to turn the dial to the temperature that you need. Just like you practiced when I sent home those oven and stove temperatures. So your dial might look a lot like this. So the numbers on the dial represent the amount of heat. The lower the number, the less heat. The higher the number, the more heat. So yours might have numbers like this, like Melanie's. Mine does not have numbers. It does say like low, high, and it says medium. And then it kind of does a range in between. So, it would say like medium, high. There's just low, medium. There's like a range in there that you need to follow based on the recipe that you're trying to make. So look at that. If the stove turns red, that's going to mean that it's hot. Depending on what kind of stove you have too, that can look differently. My stove looks a lot like the one that she has there, in that it is electric and it's just a glass top. So the circles get hot and they turn red. You might have a stove that has the circular metal pieces on the top that kind of spiral. That's also an electric stove, but it will be the same difference. Those metal pieces will get really hot, and usually how you can tell is that they turn red. But either way, it's just probably good practice to not try and put your hands or your fingers anywhere near the circle parts on the stove. Some of you may have gas stoves, in which case you should see flames coming from your stove, and that's how you know it will be on or hot. But again, best practice, don't touch where it could be hot almost ever, right? You don't need to touch it. So Melanie will need to stay safe. She will not touch a hot stove top. Melanie will need to stay safe. She will not touch a hot stove top. Melanie can burn herself on the stove top. So not only can you burn yourself, you need to be careful about setting things down on your stovetop when you're cooking something else, because you don't want to melt plastic, for instance. Or I, in the past, one time set the top to one of my glass baking dishes on the stove, and I turned the wrong burner on, and that thing shattered. And it was not a fun time to clean up, but it was also very unsafe. Let's turn to page 5. So Melanie will need to be smart. She will not place paper, cloth, or plastic on a hot stove top, because paper could catch on fire, right? Same with cloths, and plastic could melt up there. So plastic can melt and ruin the stove top, and paper and cloth can burn and catch fire. You don't want any of those things to happen. So best practice, don't put stuff on your stove top that is not cooking, right? So don't put anything up there that could cause kind of this disaster. So let's look at page 6. Melanie will need to boil the water on the stovetop. She will fill a pan with water. Melanie will turn the dial to a high number, and the stovetop will heat up the water in the pan. So usually when you're boiling water, you want your stove to be high. And it usually takes a few minutes for that water to boil in the pot. So page 7. Melanie will wait for the water to begin to boil. How will she know the water is boiling? Melanie will know when the water begins to bubble. The heat will cause the water to bubble on the surface. Let's look at this picture up here. You can see how the water is bubbling up. I'm sure a lot of you have seen water that is boiling before, and that also means that the water is extremely hot. So you don't want to spill it, you don't want to splash it. It will burn your skin just as much as touching the hot stove top or any part of this pot right here besides the handle. So page 8, Melanie will cook her food in boiling water. She will use a timer. Melanie will set the time for how long she should cook the food. The timer will tell her when to take the food off the stove. So looks like on her range there, she has a timer that's built in. Some older ones don't have a built-in timer to use, but you could use things. Let's see if I have an example right handy. You know, you could use ones that look like this maybe, that are a digital display. You could also use ones like this that aren't a digital display, but it has kind of a time lapse down. It's just good to use a timer to time out your food. I oftentimes will put a timer on my phone because maybe I walk away and go into the living room for a second or something. Then I just always have tabs on, what my food should be doing while it's cooking. Just good practice. This is a very important step on page 9. Melanie will need to be smart. When she is finished cooking, she will turn the dial off on the stove. It is dangerous to leave a stove burning. So when you're done cooking, make sure to turn it off, just like it's important to do that with the oven as well. You don't want to accidentally burn somebody in your family. You don't want to start a fire. It's just good practice to immediately turn the item off when you're done using it. And even when you turn a stove off, it's not instantly cool. It takes a few minutes for the stove to cool down. So she's kind of learning that right here. Melanie will stay safe. The stove is off, but the stove top is still hot. She will need to wait for the stove top to cool down. Melanie will need to be careful. So it does take quite a bit of time, especially on a glass top like I have, for the stove to cool off. So Melanie has learned how to safely cook food on the stove. She will be ready to make her meal. And just like everything else, practice, practice, practice. If you really want to learn how to use the stove, it's going to take practice. So that is the end of the story. Again, we need to talk about things like, if you would like to be safe, you have to practice. Remember to check your recipe and turn the dial to the temperature that you need to cook your food. Don't touch the stove top when it's on. Don't touch the pan or the pot unless you touch the handle. Remember to turn it off when you're done and wait a while before you touch the stove top because it's going to be hot. If you'd like to hear the words that we learned from the story, so you can pause here and talk about some of these words if you'd like to. You also have a copy of these words in your packet. I hope you guys learned a little bit more about using the stove, and I will see you guys next time. Have a great day.